It's Wednesday, and you all know what that means. It's time for another episode of Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co hosts. My name is Ryan Cam. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. This week, it is a returning segment here on the podcast. Once a quarter, Jacob and I like to celebrate animation. And so this episode is basically the third animation celebration. I believe it had something to do, and I'm sure Jacob Martin will correct me on this, but it was like someone at WBD. I think it was I can't remember the dude's name, but he's the David Zaslav. I think like pretty much gutted the animation department, and so we just were like, let's just have like half an hour, 45 minutes just gushing about animation. And I said in that first one that we should do it once a quarter. And we've done it in quarter one of 2023, and we did it in quarter two of 2023. And we're going to continue the tradition. And to kind of put a spin on things, and I haven't told Jacob this yet, we're going to be talking about 90s animation, a real golden age, I would say. But speaking of Jacob Martin, here's Jacob Martin. Jacob, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. Thank you again, Ryan, for having me on here. I'm excited to talk about animation. It's such a medium that I have such a huge soft spot for. Just not just the stuff I grew up with, but just the medium as a whole is just fantastic and filled with endless possibility. But yeah, as far as life stuff goes, I had a great weekend trip back home in Virginia. Uh, I got my girlfriend got to see the area and visit family, and got to worship at the home congregation with me. So that was really good, and it's just been a wonderful time. And I'll be back to school again next week. So there's some really exciting developments.
And that summer was really quick, or else this year is just going by too fast. I'll back either argument. Did the summer just go that fast, or is that normal?
The summer, well, we actually didn't get out of school until like late June, because the way it was set up. So we pretty much had the whole month of July off, and then I'd say half of August. And like I said, we're starting school again. We're recording this Monday the 7th. So a week from today is when we're starting school again.
Well, enjoy the rest of your summer while you can. But I'm glad you got to go home and you got to take your girlfriend and introduce her to your family, I assume. Did you by
Yeah.
chance take her to see Oppenheimer?
No, we didn't get to see any movies during this time because we had somebody else, roommate who's a fellow student at school, came up with me. He was preaching at the home congregation and did a fantastic job. If he's watching this, uh, but we just had a busy weekend hanging out with family, good food, all that fun stuff.
Well, that sounds fantastic. It really does. Before we dive in to the meat of the matter, I want to do a bit of house cleaning. I want to thank Jacob for being a part of my Saw review as a beginning of my road to Saw 10. That video did a whole lot better than I thought I would. And analytics and numbers don't really bother me all that much. They just don't. But to be completely honest, I was not prepared for how many views that would have gotten because I am not entirely sure how popular Saw really is. But the video went over really well, and Jacob Martin, I want to thank you for being a part of it. I was kind of pleasantly taken aback by how much you enjoyed that movie. I There was a part of me that was like it was terrible, it was gratuitous, it was really gross. I needed to go to confession for a week. But no, you actually really liked it, and I was not prepared for it.
Well, I'm always open to trying different stuff, and I do like a lot of horror movies. I'm not really that big on the schlocky, gore fest that's like that doesn't really have much of a story to it. I'm more of a story and characters type of guy. And Saul actually had that above, what the franchise, at least what the franchise, what I assume later got into, was more infamous for. And so I think the first Saw, I think, deserves more credit than what it actually gets. I think it's actually a legit good movie.
Yeah, and I said in that review that the first Saw at this point is pretty much a modern classic. Like it's got to be in the modern horror classic conversation. It gave some life to Cary Elwes' career, and it launched James Wan and Lee Winnell, and they're both very involved in movies to this day. Lee Winnell pretty much being the beating heart of movies like Upgrade, which is still criminally underrated, and The Invisible Man, which unfortunately it came out in February of 2020, and we don't remember all that much from that time period. That was the before times, but Lee Winnell would go on to have a long and lengthy career that's still going. And James Wan, I mean, he pretty much launched the biggest horror cinematic universe going right now in the Conjuring universe. That is his baby, for lack of a better word. So Saw pretty much launched their careers, and they would come back in the script writing department for a couple of the other entries, including, I believe, two and three. I know three for sure, but two I'd have to double check. But yeah, I feel like people look at a movie like Saw and they think it's very one dimensional, but I promise and I assure you all that it is really not. It's better than it's better than people give it credit for. But that is one of the things that I did end up watching this week. I think that's a good place to parlay into talking about what we watched this week. But actually, I forgot. Before we do that, I wanted to thank you all so much for the love that you're giving the Small Talk podcast that I'm doing with Jacob Collins from 3D Movie Cinema and Matt Wyatt. I'm having the time of my life doing that podcast, and like I told Jacob, and like I told all of you in the August preview, nothing about life in the movies changes. This is just another thing that I'm doing. Still, Wednesdays are still Life in the Movies Day, and that's not changing anytime soon. There's no worry about that. I'm just throwing it out there in case any of you were curious. But thank you so much for pouring all the love onto Small Talk. Um, I've got quite a few things I watched lately, but not to hog the entire podcast just for myself. Jacob, why don't you talk about some things that you've been watching lately?
Yeah, I didn't have too much that I've watched, especially considering the weekend I've just had. But I can tell you, there's three that I did watch. I'm bringing the Alfred Hitchcock project back, uh, and Ryan, to kind of give a tease of what's going to happen in the coming weeks. Ryan's going to collab with me on a review of the Alfred Hitchcock film Lifeboat, released in 1944. I did watch the film recently. The story, I probably won't dive too deep into it now. Save that for the video. What's crazy is it's based on a story by John Steinbeck, who's best known for writing The Grapes of Wrath. And the film follows these people stranded on a U-boat during World War, not U-boat, a lifeboat during World War II. And it's a very engaging story. There's some great performances in there. Uh, it's set in one location, and this was the first movie where Hitchcock utilized the one location aspect, which is something he later mastered in Rear Window, one of his best movies. And even with its 90-minute runtime, it's a very engaging thriller. There's a lot of complicated ethics on morality, as part of the plot involves German that gets washed aboard on this boat, and they have to decide what to do with him. Should they kill him or make him a prisoner? That's a very hard decision to make. And I enjoyed that development in the story. And as a whole, I think it's one of Alfred Hitchcock's more underrated films. And I can't wait to dive more into it when I get into that video, and when I get to hear Ryan's thoughts on the film. So I can't wait to check. I'm messing up because, uh, but I think it's a great movie. That's enough said.
Yeah, that's what you were trying to say. I was gonna watch it this week, and I got the DVD, but the DVD kind of crapped out on me. It happens sometimes, you know. It's an older DVD, probably released in like early to mid 2000s. It's gotten a lot of wear and tear, and we've got a disc cleaner where I work, so might just have to run it through there. But started it, and I was liking what they were doing, and then it froze, and then it jumped like 5 minutes, and I'm like, what? And then I tried to go back, and then it jumped like another 10. I'm like, I can't do this. So I'm just gonna have to find another way. And I did find another way through the library service Hoopla, which I have recommended on other platforms. It is available on there. So I'm just going to watch Lifeboat on there. And I am looking forward to watching that and reviewing it with you, Jacob, because what I was able to see, I was getting into, especially the woman on the boat and just all the various dynamics. And then you got the German on there in the middle of World War II. Not exactly the best, not exactly German. German sentiment was kind of at an all-time low at that point, so would have been an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and I'm excited for you to actually finish the whole movie. I'm curious what you're going to think of it because I think, as of where it stands, of the Hitchcock films I've seen, not just from what I've done on the project, but I think of what I've seen as a whole, I can safely put Lifeboat in my top 10 Hitchcock.
Oh, interesting. Well, what else you got?
Another one I watched for the first time is Leroy and Stitch, which was a it served actually as the finale to the Lilo and Stitch TV series, but I never watched the movie because I was burned out by a lot of the direct to video Disney sequels by this point. So I didn't watch it at the time, but I rewatched it for celebrating Disney. And I thought the film was okay. It I felt like it did a good job of wrapping up, I guess, the angle of the TV series, which I watched a little bit of as a kid. The TV show revolved around Lilo and Stitch trying to capture and reform all of the 625 experiments that were let loose in Hawaii. So the finale of that involves the villains of the series creating kind of like an evil clone version of Stitch named Leroy, who's pretty much Stitch but is red instead of blue, to take on Stitch. And I feel like some of the heart of Lilo and Stitch is gone in Leroy and Stitch because this movie, and I think the show in general, and then Stitch the movie, which was like the pilot of the series, which was also a direct to video follow up. They focus more heavily on the sci-fi side of Lilo and Stitch, and yeah, the sci-fi stuff is good, but I like the sci-fi stuff when it was more in the background. The heart of Lilo and Stitch was the family aspect, the Ohana aspect in the Hawaiian culture, the bond with Lilo and her older sister, and then uh, it, where Stitch falls into play and all that. And I think going too far into the sci-fi took away a lot of the heart that made me love the original film, but it does have some entertainment value. It didn't insult my intelligence or anything. I think it still did its job as far as wrapping up the series, but it's nothing anything too spectacular either.
Yeah, I remember hearing the press for this because this was still in my prime Disney Channel viewing era, so I did hear a lot about this and seeing some of the commercials for it. Never watched it though. I have not seen Lilo and Stitch in a minute, and so I definitely want to check that back out since I'm slowly working my way through all of the Disney canon. Lilo and Stitch is bound to come up somewhere. But Leroy and Stitch is an odd bird from what it sounds like.
Yeah, it definitely is. Even naming the evil clone of Stitch Leroy, which did garner a laugh, kind of similar to the Alien and Guardians 2 being named Taserface, kind of similar to that joke, but that was still an odd choice for sure. And then for fun, I rewatched Star Wars Attack of the Clones just because I wanted to. And, I enjoy Attack of the Clones for what it is. It's not my, it, for me, it's one of the weaker Star Wars movies. Like the romance dialogue with Anakin and Padme is dreadful. And I think it's unintentionally hilarious how bad some of the dialogue is. But everything else around the film, I can defend. I think it does a good job of doing like the building blocks of what led to the Empire. The mystery angle with Obi-Wan, uh, investigating what's going on with the clone army and the mysterious assassination attempts, Jango Fett. All that stuff's pretty good. Some great action in the third act, especially the beginning of the Clone Wars. I love the battle in the arena is pretty good. Uh, you get Christopher Lee as Count Dooku, who I wouldn't say is a top tier Star Wars villain, but I still think he was good enough for Star Wars, and it's cool seeing him in Star Wars. And uh, I I enjoyed that fight at the end. I've been seeing Yoda in action. I've always been a fan of. So I think it's like a flawed Star Wars movie in a lot of ways. It has a lot of high entertainment value, but the only reason it's near the bottom of my Star Wars ranking is I don't like sand, and I am so haunted by the kiss that you never should have given me, and I'm not afraid to die, but I'm dying each day ever since you came back into my life. I mean, come on, Lucas, you could write better than that.
Yeah, Attack of the Clones is definitely not perfect, and it's a lot of cringy dialogue. I've been so back and forth on this movie my whole life, but I'm at the place now where I can definitively say it's far from perfect, but when it does hit, it hits really hard. I will always love how George Lucas cast Christopher Lee as Count Dooku, and not just like any Christopher Lee. We're talking about the Christopher Lee because this movie came out in 2002 when a little movie called Lord of the Rings was coming out around the same time. Two Towers and Attack of the Clones came out the same year. Christopher Lee was a very wealthy man that year. That's what I will say. But yeah, he was great as Count Dooku. His limited scenes I thought were very well done. People always complain, you could clearly see he's a stunt double in the lightsaber duel. Yeah, the man was in his 60s by that point. What do you want? Like, seriously, what do you want? It's Christopher Lee. He's one of the best to ever do it. So I'll always defend him on that. I think I think that Obi-Wan investigating the clone army and Camino and Geonosis, I thought was infinitely more interesting than what all was going on with Anakin and Padme and that nonsense. I could watch like basically if and wouldn't have been feasible to do, but I feel like if they just made the movie about Obi-Wan and Anakin trying to figure out all these clone troopers and then maybe tie it back into Master Sifo-Dyas, maybe Qui-Gon Jinn, basically using Sifo-Dyas as some kind of alias, because in episode one, it was heavily implied that Qui-Gon thought that a war was coming, and the Jedi Council was like, yeah, that's not happening. I feel like if that had been tied a little more together, I think the movie would have been better received. When the movie, like I said, when the movie does hit, it hits really hard and it is good stuff. But however, there's a lot of bad in it too, so it just equates to just about a mixed bag for me.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Regardless of your thoughts on the prequels, I think some of the later Star Wars movies in general, like I guess my big hot take is that there's so much enjoyable stuff in all the Star Wars movies. To me, there's no bad Star Wars movie, but some Star Wars movies are infinitely better than others.
That is certainly for sure. But do you have anything else?
That's it. What have you watched?
So like I said, I'm gonna speed run through some of these. So First up, continuing my Disney watch, I rewatched, and I know I've seen the movie before, but I rewatched for the first time in a while the original Cinderella from 1950. Last episode, or not last episode, but it was the episode before of this podcast, I talked about how I started kind of rewatching all of the older Disney movies, and I hit the wartime era, and I might as well have hit a brick wall because the animation was beautiful, but just it was a slog to get through all of those, and most of them were just north of an hour, like an hour 9, hour 10, and I still felt it. But Cinderella, like, it got me out of the slump because that movie I think is of very high quality. The titular song "A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes," it's still a really good song to this day. The animation is gorgeous. It's a simple story, and the story has been done and retold and derivative of multiple times over, but I would argue, even more than Snow White, Cinderella is the Rosetta Stone for the fairy tales that we know today. Every trick and trope can be derivative, or not derivative, but can be traced back to the OG Cinderella. And I think, despite the fact that it is made in the 50s, and you can argue if it's aged well or not, I still think it is aged tremendously well for the most part. So, big thumbs up from me, and was exactly what Disney needed because I was sick of the clip shows by that point, and then Cinderella hit, and I was like, all right, now that's what I'm talking about. And then started my Saw rewatch, and up until this recording, I have watched Saw 1, 2, 3, and 4. Saw 1, that review is currently on the channel now. Saw 2 will be dropping this coming Friday. I think Saw 2 is just as good as the first Saw. It's a bit of a step down, but it's of equal quality. It basically, we introduce, we get introduced to, well, not introduced, but reintroduced to John Kramer as Jigsaw. He's not just the big twist reveal at the end. We get to know about him, the fact that he has cancer, and just that gets fleshed out a lot more, and how he's doing this as kind of a very twisted way of showing people that they have blessings in their life and they can be easily taken away. Uh, Tobin Bell is one of the things that really makes these movies work. He is really committed to from the movies that I've seen in this series, he really commits himself, and I do appreciate that. The traps definitely get ramped up in this. However, narratively, they make sense. The movie contains one of my favorite, and by one of my favorite, I mean one of my most like traps, like cringe-inducing traps. It's one where one of the victims has to jump and look through a key through a like hole filled with used heroin needles because the victim is a recovering drug addict, and she has to find the key, the literal need, like the old adage, needle in a haystack. She needs to find a key in a sea of needles. So it's ironic in that way. And the movie adds Donnie Wahlberg as Detective Eric Matthews, who makes a couple more appearances in the series. I won't say where. And I feel like he does the job just fine. Again, not as good as the first Saw, but of equal quality. I will say the same for Saw 3 and 4. Again, I will add the caveat, slight dips in quality every time, but I was still very entertained by all of them up to this point. And I have not watched 5 through 7, and I have been reliably informed by Jacob Collins that 5 through 7 are when they start to get kind of bad. So I am bracing myself for that. But 2 through 4, I can honestly say they're just as like I like all 4 of these equally. Like Saw is my favorite. It is the modern classic. Then 2 is still really good. 3 is just as good, and 4 is just as good. So one really outstanding one, and 2 or 3, one really outstanding one really good one, and then 2 really solid entries. I'm honestly surprised I'm still enjoying the movies 4 movies deep into a series of coming on 10. So that's very shocking to me. But I'm holding out hope that I'm not holding out hope, but I'm kind of saying to myself, okay, the bottom's got to drop out eventually. So there is that. And then let's see what else I got. Oh, I have not logged this yet, but earlier today I saw the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, Mutant Mayhem. And honestly, the movie was a lot better than I was expecting it to be. I'm not a big Ninja Turtles guy, but I had heard nothing but good things, so I was expecting to like it. And honestly, I really liked it. I'm gonna have a review of it either in the cinema catch-up for quarter 3 or a standalone video, but I really enjoyed it. And I, I, my history with I almost called him Seth Green, with Seth Rogen is very mixed. His comedy is usually doesn't work for me, but honestly, it works for me here. And I have a feeling that how the movie ends, they want to do more of these, and so I sincerely hope that there is another one. I will leave it at that. But yeah, that's what I've watched lately. It's quite a bit.
Yeah, and of those movies, the only one I've seen, Cinderella. I like Cinderella. It is a classic, not one that I gravitate towards as far as Disney classics go, but it's still a good movie. It did a lot of things right. It helped bring Disney back to where it needed to be at the time, and it's still a classic story. I think the Cinderella story personally was done better in some of the other iterations I've seen, like the Rogers and Hammerstein Cinderella that came out in the 90s with Brandy and Whitney Houston. I watched it for the first time earlier this year and thought it was terrific. And then this is a hot take. I actually prefer the live action remake of Cinderella with Lily James over the animated film. That's my favorite version of the story.
To
But
be to be completely honest, out of all the live action remakes, that Cinderella one is still my favorite. I still think that that one was of very high quality.
yeah, it is very high quality. And I actually think that's a great adaptation of the story and easily the best live action remake Disney has made at this point. But I guess it all started from the animated one, so I have to give it some credit and respect where credit is due.
Yeah, absolutely. But I pass it off to all of you. What have you been watching lately? Let us know in the comments. Love to read what you have to say. So, no Iron Fist coverage this week, and that's on me because of Smallville and other things. I just didn't have the chance to watch it and just partially kind of didn't want to. Sorry about that, but we will return next week with the coverage because we're almost done with this season and we will finish it. We will slay this dragon. But let's dive into the main event, the Animation Celebration Part 3, 90s animation style. And, Jacob, I think that's as good a place as any to kind of talk about the 90s. I want to talk about Beauty and the Beast because that was the one that it was the first animated movie nominated for Best Picture, not just Best Animated Feature, but Best Picture, like with the adult movies. And so I feel like Beauty and the Beast earns its place in history just for that alone. But it also helps that the movie is of extremely high quality.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to me, it's such a shame that there's only been three movies in the Academy history that's ever been nominated for Best Picture because there's been so many amazing animated films that's come out, at least since Snow White. And I feel like a lot of them have the potential to be Best Picture candidates if the Academy members were not so biased against the medium of animation and them seeing it as like a lesser art form, uh, seeing thinking it's something only to shut up their kids. And there's more to it than that. There's passion put into the work of the animators. Beauty and the Beast is a musical, so you have to have great songs to tell the story and keep it going, keep the story progressing. It's a romance. You got to make the romance believable. You got to make the characters relatable and endearing, and you have to make sure you tell the story to the highest quality. And that Beauty and the Beast covered all of those things. And I've always stated this about Beauty and the Beast. If Walt Disney had if Walt Disney saw where the studio was today, I think of all the animated movies that have come out since he passed away, Beauty and the Beast, I would think would be the film he would be the most proud of, because of how much uh, the animation has evolved since when he was there, and how much of the lessons that they had learned from the older movies and how they applied it into Beauty and the Beast and told such a really amazing story out of it. I love Beauty and the Beast.
If we're talking about like greatest prologues in movie history, that has to be the greatest one of the greatest prologues of all time because how the story is told of how the beast becomes the beast through the stained glass window and the stained glass window art. I thought that was just beautiful stuff. It floors me still to this day.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing aspects about Beauty and the Beast. Not just that, the attention to detail, how the romance is developed, I thought was done very well because it's so vague on the passage of time from where from where Belle is in the castle. You see the changing of weather, like it starts snowing at some point, but you don't know if was going on for days or months, maybe even a year, maybe you don't know. But I think you can make plot holes with that, I guess, with that and the logic and where other characters are at. But I think not knowing the passage of time, I think makes the romance more believable, because it just kind of fills in the gap of where especially where Belle and the Beast are at, and also the I guess kind of the urgency with you know the more the petals from the rose keep dropping, the closer the beast turns 21, everyone's going to stay cursed. And so there's a bit of that to it as well. And I think that's what I like about the original Beauty and the Beast. Of course, the animation's amazing. Belle is my favorite Disney princess. I love the songs. Shout out to Alan Menken and especially the late Howard Ashman, who sadly passed away before the release of Beauty and the Beast. He put his heart and soul into crafting some amazing songs for this movie. Be Our Guest, Beauty and the Beast, Something There, Gaston's a really good villain song. It's this, and we'll probably talk about one of the other films, Disney films in the stream as well. But Beauty and the Beast and the Lion King, they're like my go-to Disney films, top two. Very, I guess, the Lion King's probably my favorite, but Beauty and the Beast is like very, very close second for me. I love it.
Absolutely. Well, I want to pivot away from Disney just for just a minute. We will return, I promise. But this was really the decade in which one of the more promising like directors to come out of Disney kind of started to falter and kind of fade away, and that being Don Bluth. I remember and haven't seen all of Bluth's movies, but just from research, seemed like with An American Tale, with The Land Before Time, and with one more that I can't think of, but it's on the tip of my tongue.
Secret of Nim.
Secret and Nim, thank you. With all of that, seems like Don Bluth is going to be the next heavy hitter, but in the 90s, it's like, I don't know what happened, but it just fell apart. Like Rockadoodle, American Tail, Five Hole Goes West, which has the last voice performance or performance period of James Stewart. There's one of like a pebble and a penguin, I think. Nostalgia Critic, I think, reviewed that
Yeah.
one. Yeah, Don Bluth, I don't want to say he lost his mind because from what it seems like, he seems like a really nice guy. So I don't want to like, I don't want to throw dirt or anything, but just, man, what an odd series of movies in this decade for him.
Um, I actually I did a director project on Don Bluth before I even started the YouTube channel. So I watched all the 90s Don Bluth movies. And to clarify, Don Bluth did not direct American Tail 2. That was made by Steven Spielberg's short lived animation studio. Don Bluth had no involvement in that. But the movies he did make in the 90s before Anastasia, which was kind of a temporary comeback for Don Bluth, and that's a pretty good movie. He did Rockadoodle, Thumbelina, A Stroll in Central Park, and The Pebble and the Penguin. And I don't think Bluth lost his touch. I don't even think he was to blame for those movies' failures because all four of those movies had really bad production problems. They were backed up by different studios who definitely were not as passionate about the art of animation compared to Disney. And the studios that kept distributing these movies screwed Bluth over big time. All four of those movies had massive studio interference, and that really put a damper on the quality of his movies. And all four of those movies flopped because the studios didn't have faith in any of those movies, which is a bit of a shame. And the products that we got at the end, Rockadoodle to me is a so bad it's good movie because that movie is so nonsensical. And there's just so much weird stuff in that movie that it becomes unironically enjoyable because of how weird it gets. Thumbelina is a mess. Uh, there's some effort into it, but it does feel like Diet Disney. Troll in Central Park is horrible. In my opinion, it's Don Bluth's worst movie. Not that I fault Bluth for it. Uh, the studio gave him very little to work with, and it shows. And then the Pebble and the Penguin is nothing to write home about either. So definitely not a good time for Don Bluth. The only film that I really liked from the '90s that he did was Anastasia.
I have definitively seen Anastasia, and I did enjoy that one. So again, this is not going to be the let's dump on Don Bluth hour, I promise. The guy, from what I've seen in interviews, seems like a really nice guy. So I'm not going to try and be too harsh, but it just seemed like, and again, from what, and I'm going to take your word for this, Jacob, but it seems like he had good ideas. It was just the studios, as it often is.
Yeah, pretty much. And um, yeah, I think if he had his control like he did in the '80s, I think he would have been a serious competitor against Disney, kind of like when he was in the '80s. But unfortunately, things didn't turn out that way.
Yeah, yeah, that again, it is rather unfortunate, but again, kind of staying along the non-Disney path because animation was thriving in this decade. But I wanted to see, Jacob, if you had ever seen this movie. You ever seen Cool World from Ralph Bakshi?
I have not seen Cool World. The only reason I know about it is because I've seen the Nostalgia Critics review of it, and it sounds like a very off the rails movie. And I think that one had some studio interference as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that movie broke Ralph Bakshi to the point where he didn't make much movies after the release of Cool World. Bakshi is one I have not seen much of. The only film I've seen of his is his animated Lord of the Rings movie he did back in 1978. And I wasn't particularly that fond of that movie, especially compared to the better version of Lord of the Rings we got, that amazing live action trilogy directed by Peter Jackson. But it seems like one of those very off the wall animated movies that you have to see to believe. But I think it was trying, I guess, to try to be like a more adult version of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and it looked like it backfired miserably.
Yeah, from what I have heard, and this is from the Nostalgia Critic review, it appears that Bakshi wanted to do the first ever hard R animated horror film, which probably would have been way ahead of its time if if that's what would have happened. But that's not what happened. I believe even Kim Basinger stepped in and was like, "Yeah, I visit children's hospitals. I can't take like this like to show the kids that I see in hospitals." So, from what I have gleaned over the years, Ralph Bakshi is someone who had his own vision and only made movies that he wanted to make, which animated while also being very dark, very adult. Basically, South Park style of humor, like George Carlin style of humor, but animated. So I don't know if he would have flown in today's era. I don't think he would have, but his filmography is certainly like one of the more curious ones of all time. I think it's worth either I doing it or maybe Jacob, you should do it. I throw that out to you. Like one of us should do it. Like watch all of his movies and report back.
Yeah, that would be interesting if one of us agrees to that. I actually know I've seen two things from Bakshi. Bakshi directed a Dr. Seuss cartoon at one point.
Which one?
He directed the Butter Battle Book.
The
It's
who?
the Butter Battle Book. You've never heard of that?
No.
Oh, that's an underrated Dr. Seuss book, by the way. It was one of his later books. Dr. Seuss wrote a book that was kind of a satire on the Cold War, and it's actually very brilliant in how he did it. With these like fictional characters who are kind of at war with one another, and they're trying to compete on who has the bigger weapon. Pretty much, that's the concept of the story. And Ralph Bakshi directed the Butter Battle Book cartoon. It has the animation style of Dr. Seuss. He didn't change Seuss's style to make it his own. He respected Seuss and was able to fit within the confines of Dr. Seuss. There's this one musical sequence that's very Bakshi with the creation of like the ultimate weapon at the end, which is actually pretty cool. And I would say I've only seen that in Lord of the Rings. It's a 30-minute cartoon. I don't know if you can look it up on YouTube or not, but I actually do like this cartoon that he directed, the Butter Battle Book.
Hang on, I'm looking it up now. Give me a second. It's the Butter Battle Book. 1989 Ralph Bakshi. I think I found it. I'm gonna watch this later. But yeah, I found it. That sounds bizarre. But I mean, Ralph Bakshi kind of dabbled in bizarre, so it seems rather on brand for him. But yeah, let's go back to Disney. I promised we would go back to Disney, and here we go. Lion King, you brought up Jacob, but also during this decade, because this was in like prime Disney Renaissance territory we're talking about here. We're talking about Aladdin, and also, I believe in the same year or a year later, The Nightmare Before Christmas, which remains one of my favorite holiday movies of all time. Watch it at Halloween or Christmas. I say do it both. Like it fits in either holiday perfectly. So, I mean, Aladdin is of high quality as well, but Nightmare Before Christmas, I think, is more unique in that at first people were like, what is this? But you can't go a Halloween or a Christmas nowadays without seeing Nightmare Before Christmas stuff everywhere. They deck out the Haunted Mansion ride here at Orlando, the Orlando Disney, with Nightmare Before Christmas stuff. That's how much of an impact it made years later. But Aladdin or Nightmare, I love both equally, but Nightmare I've seen a ton more times.
Yeah, even though Nightmare Before Christmas is not part of the Disney Renaissance, as it was Disney distributed it, but it was animated, I think, elsewhere. But it's still a great movie. It's one I did not have any nostalgia for as a kid, believe it or not. I didn't watch the film till I was a teenager, but even late in the game, I saw how great of a movie it actually is. And it's one that I do often go back to either around Halloween or Christmas. I think it's such a really good movie. And I especially love the animation and the Danny Elfman songs. But the Disney Renaissance in general is my favorite era of Disney animation, even though it started in 1989 with The Little Mermaid. Diving into the 90s, they just had great animated film after animated film. We talked about Beauty and the Beast. Aladdin is really good. We all know how amazing The Lion King is, but I briefly want to highlight some other animated films from this time that I think they're overall praised by a lot of people, but I think they also deserve their fair due as well. The
Yeah,
Rescuers Down Under, very underrated sequel to The Rescuers. I dare say it's better than The Rescuers, especially on animation level, and that it's more of an action adventure film. It's one of the first Disney films I ever watched as a kid, and I have such a great fondness for it. I get it. People like to crap on Pocahontas. It's not historically accurate, and people didn't like the changes. But if you just look at it at face value, it's a pretty solid movie, beautifully animated, and it has some amazing songs from Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz. One of my personal favorites is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's honestly in my top five animated Disney movies of all time. It is a fantastic animated movie. Definitely one of the darker animated films, and I can see why some are turned off by it. But I think it is such a stunning achievement in animation. I think it tackled its themes very well, and it's one of the more emotionally poignant stories Disney has ever told. And I respect the heck out of the movie for it. Mulan, I know there's a lot of love for that movie. I think it's a great movie. I love Mulan as the lead protagonist. Some good action in it, and one of my favorite sidekick comic relief characters with Eddie Murphy's Mushu. Hercules, I think it's one of the lesser entries in the Renaissance personally, but it's still pretty good. Has some great humor in it, and I love some of the side characters. And one of my other favorites from the Renaissance era is Tarzan. I love Tarzan from the animation, the characters, and especially the Phil Collins soundtrack. So you can't go wrong with the Disney Renaissance. There's no bad film in the era, and that era, at least to me, at least represents what Disney could do best, especially with 2D animation and how to incorporate uh, a very well structured stories with music to guide it along the way.
absolutely. I mean, we're talking like 80, 88, 89 to 2002. Disney were just dropping nothing but hits, like hits as far as the eye could see. And I wanted to bring up one that you probably forgot about, a Goofy movie.
Oh
Now,
yeah,
again, not like talked about too much during the Renaissance, but it's a movie that I personally love. It's a movie called A Goofy Movie, and yet the father-son dynamic between Max and Goofy is honestly quite mature, and I still think that it is just handled so well. Like the part where Goofy learns about the lie from Max of where they're going. He's like left or right, like left or right. Like that scene is so well done for an animated movie released in the mid 90s aimed at children called A Goofy Movie. They didn't have to go that deep, but I'm so glad they did.
yeah. Goofy movie is pretty good as well, and I dare say that movie, especially the core themes of that movie, might have been what inspired the Mitchells versus the Machines with its father daughter story and the road trip elements. They have the sci fi twist to it, but you can definitely see the similarities between both movies. And I do like a Goofy movie awfully well. They added more heart to it than a movie that you expect, considering it's the Goofy movie.
Yeah, again, title is rather misleading. It's honestly quite good. And then outside of the Renaissance, you got Disney still doing some very good things as well. I mean, they were just dropping nothing but hits on there as well. Another one that I think you forgot to mention was Hercules, and that's a
Oh,
movie that I think doesn't get nearly enough love. And if you did mention it, then I do apologize.
yeah, I did mention Hercules when I ran through them. It's one of to me it's one of the lesser entries in the Renaissance, but I still think it's pretty good. I like especially the comic The comedy edge that movie has. It has such a unique animation style. Did you know that the head animator for that movie was the guy who worked on the animated sequences in the Pink Floyd The Wall movie?
I did not know that, but honestly, that does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy that that actually happened, but it's pretty good. It was also an odd choice to for a movie centered on Greek mythology to have your art style look like something you see at a Las Vegas casino, and to have gospel music as your primary genre of music for Hercules. But I would not change a single thing about the songs. Those songs are absolute bangers. Alan Menken scored once again, especially with songs like Zero to Hero and I Won't Say I'm in Love, especially, are two of my favorite songs from that movie.
If Go the Distance does not get your blood pumping, you need to check your pulse. That's all I will say.
Yeah, that's a good song too. That and the Michael Bolton version I have a soft spot for.
Yeah, but we saw during this decade the launch of not one, but two studios into the mainstream. We had Pixar, which Pixar had been knocking around for a few years before the 90s. But in 95, they dropped Toy Story. We all know what that movie is. And then Toy Story 2, which is still my favorite Pixar movie of all time, and that has not changed for any reason. I love pretty much all the Toy Story movies, though 2 is still absolutely my favorite. But again, Pixar was making shorts in the late 80s, but in the 90s, it was when they started making full length feature animated films and basically started a run of dominance that would last from 95 to 2006, from Toy Story to the first Cars.
Yeah, and also you got to remember that Toy Story was groundbreaking in the fact that it was the first fully computer animated film, and CGI had been kind of creeping its way into animation. It was used throughout some of Disney's Renaissance films to assist some of the more technologically complex sequences in their movies, like the ballroom dance and Beauty and the Beast, some of the magic carpet shots in Aladdin, the wildebeest stampede, and the Lion King, for instance. But Toy Story was so groundbreaking that it offered a new style of animation that became the dominant force that uh, you still see even to this very day. And the fact that it launched such an incredible animation studio like Pixar, which, yeah, to me, Disney and Pixar are kind of synonymous with one another now, especially since Disney bought Pixar and they've had this incredible partnership since 2006. But it all started with the first Toy Story, and it's still one of their best films. Toy Story 2 is a great sequel, and I know, Ryan, you didn't bring up A Bug's Life, but I do think A Bug's Life often gets overlooked among the Pixar library. I don't think it's a top tier effort from the studio, but it's still good for what it is, and I still have a lot of fond memories of that film.
Yeah, I did leave out a Bug's Life, and that's on me. That's my bad. Bug's Life, definitely not, I would argue, top tier Pixar, but still very good. And it's lie revealed. It's a trope that I do not like, but the rest of the movie is quite good. So I will forgive it this once. But another studio that began, and well, Jacob, we have kind of a history with this studio, is a little studio called DreamWorks. Hell, we have a podcast talking about DreamWorks, which, speaking of, I imagine the Flushed Away episode is going to be coming down the pike very soon, and I'm looking forward to talking about Flushed Away. But they dropped their first movie in 98 with Ants, very weird Woody Allen style movie, and then they would hit the ground running to success that they have today. They got two movies out this year. I believe it was two, Trolls 3 and Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken. So they're still doing very good things, and it started in the 90s. And it all started from a grudge that Jeffrey Katzenberg had against Disney. Well, we all got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's crazy how DreamWorks got its start. And we all know, I think a lot of us know the feud between Jeffrey Katzenberg and Disney. And then he had the feud with John Lasseter over who came up with the Ant movie first. Was it John Lasseter with A Bug's Life or Jeffrey Katzenberg with Ants? But regardless of what side you take on that and what's the better Ant movie, I personally think A Bug's Life is better personally. Ants is still such an oddity in DreamWorks animation. It's definitely not a kids movie, that's for sure, with the Woody Allen style humor in the film. But yeah, I think Ants is still a creative movie for what it is, even if the animation has not aged the best. But I cannot stress how much I love DreamWorks their other '90s film, The Prince of Egypt. One of the best animated films of all time, in my opinion. One that could often be mistaken as a Disney film with the musical numbers and even the animation style, but this was a passion project. As much as I have issues with Jeffrey Katzenberg as a whole, some of his creative decisions, uh, this was his passion project all the way. Even at Disney, he pitched the idea of the Ten Commandments, but animated. Disney didn't have faith in the project, but Katzenberg would not back down. And I would say, as, as flawed as Katzenberg is, uh, if if producers have a right to have a magnum opus, uh, the Prince of Egypt definitely would be the case for Katzenberg. I think it's such an amazing movie. It did such a phenomenal job of telling the Bible story of Moses in the animated medium without sugarcoating uh, the mature aspects of the story. The songs are beautiful. I love the animation, and it's probably my favorite animated movie that's not made by Disney. It's that good of a movie.
Yeah, I will always have time for Jeffrey Katzenberg because he said, "All right, everybody, stop what you're doing. Ten Commandments, that's your focus." And he made pretty much, I would argue, one of, if not the best faith-based film of all time, because he could have made that. And people complain about the songs and stuff, and I mean, I can definitely see where they're coming from. And of course, license was taken, but I mean, it's the Bible. There are certain things that had to be embellished for effect. I understand that. But yeah, I mean, you can't argue with the results. Prince of Egypt is, like you said, Jacob, one of the best animated movies of all time that Disney had no hand in whatsoever. But I think I want to close this celebration out because we've only scratched the surface of the 90s. I feel like we can return to this decade at a later date for animated movies. But I wanted to bring up, Jacob, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. And people frequently talk about this. It's either Dark Knight or Mask of the Phantasm as like best Batman movies of all time. And Jacob, we did the Dark Knight watch along with Matt Wyatt, so it's still fresh in my head. However, Mask of the Phantasm, as I've gotten older, I've recognized that, yeah, it is a fantastic movie, regardless of live action, animated, or otherwise. It's one of those movies that just really it was at right place, right time, and right circumstances because Batman the Animated Series was just one of the best things on television, period. It was the pinnacle for Batman stuff at the time. The Burton Batman stuff, it was well regarded, but it was like Batman the Animated Series. People just want a live action version of that when people talk about what Matt Reeves should do next. They're like, see Batman the Animated Series? Take that, make it live action, you're printing money. Like that's the rationale for some people. And I think The Dark Knight is the best Batman movie, period. Mask of the Phantasm is a very close second, almost like a 1A, 1B situation. They did not have to go this hard on Mask of the Phantasm, but I'm so glad they did.
Yeah, what's funny, the funny thing is, I never watched Mask of the Phantasm until I'd say about 2 years ago now. It was something I had heard about for many years, but I never actually watched it until a couple of years ago when I had HBO Max at the time. And man, did I love this movie. It's a contender for one of the best Batman movies. Uh, like you said, Ryan, regardless of the medium of the storytelling, whether animated or live action. Now, The Dark Knight will always be my favorite Batman movie. I don't think that's a movie that's incredibly hard to top, in my opinion. But Mask of the Phantasm, if I was combining the animated and live action Batman movies, it'd be an easy top five. Even though the movie's only like 75 minutes long, it does not it does not slow down a bit. Like it tells its story with such ease. It took advantage of its time. I liked how the movie we get to see more of a interesting angle for Bruce Wayne in this movie where he falls in love. He wants to give up his life as Batman to be with his woman, but he knows that, deep down, Batman is the character. Batman is his true identity, which is something we talked about in our Dark Knight watch party. Just there's just some really powerful stuff in that movie, like the scene where you see Bruce Wayne at his parents' gravesite, uh, you know, dealing with like his regrets and stuff. Is such a powerful scene that I've not seen explored in any of the other Batman movies. And we get a little bit of the flashbacks of the origin and where he puts the mask on, and even Alfred is scared of the Batman costume. I thought that was a really cool touch as well. Some really good action in it. I love the animation. Really awesome score. The Phantasm, such an interesting character, and you can't go wrong with Mark Hamill as the Joker. I mean, Mark Hamill is, I mean, he doesn't top Heath Ledger, but he's still a top tier Joker in my mind. So there's a lot to love in Mask of the Phantasm.
Oh, 100%. And just like I said, it was like peak, like Batman the animated series had debuted, I believe, the year prior in 92. And then this movie came out and WB was just like, yeah, just we've got a hot show. Just make a movie to release in theaters. We don't care. And Bruce Timm was like, all right, let me show you how it's done. And I don't think any animated superhero movie has come even close. And there have honestly been some quite good ones. Superman, shoot, not Superman, but The Dark Knight Returns, which was a two-part adaptation of Frank Miller's legendary graphic novel. That was brought to life in 2012. It was split into two parts for God only knows why. But if you find the deluxe edition Blu-ray, you can just buy that. And that movie is very good. I'd argue it's just as good a Batman v Superman confrontation as the one we got from Zack Snyder. But then also you have Justice League Doom, which is a very underrated Batman story. Basically, we find that Batman has basically a kill list of all of the Justice League's weaknesses should any one of them go rogue, and it's kind of a moral play of should this list even exist to begin with. But yeah, it's severely underrated. But Mask of the Phantasm is like S tier, top tier, not just animation, not just Batman stuff, but movies in general, I would argue. It is genuinely fantastic stuff. One day with like Jake Collins or Matt Wyatt, we need to do like a Mask of the Phantasm watch along. I'm going to put a pin in that. That's going to be a future watch along here on this channel.
Yeah, that would be awesome if we ever get to doing that. That would be really good.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's where we're going to end the animation celebration part 3. There will be a part 4, I assure you, because I do love doing these animation celebrations. Just Jacob and me shooting the crap on just animation, which is a medium that we both heavily respect. But I pass it off to you. I'm sure we missed a very highly acclaimed animated movie from the 90s. Let us know in the comments. Let us know some of your favorites. Love to hear what you have to say. I'm sure Aaron White is going to have a lot of interesting things to say about Mask of the Phantasm, because I know Superman is his boy, but I think Mask of the Phantasm, he's got a lot of good things to say. But leave it in the comments. Love to hear what you have to say. Jacob, it's always a privilege to record with you every week. Tell the people where they can find you.
They can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called now. I don't really care at this point. I'll still be on there if the functions are the same, and Facebook. And of course, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. I primarily do movie reviews and live streams and other fun stuff. This week on my channel, this Friday at I'm gonna say 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be doing a live collab with Jacob Collins from 3D Movie Cinema, where we'll be reviewing Scream 6. That's the main thing that'll be on the channel this week, and then I'll also upload some of my videos that I've done for my last what I've watched live streams I haven't gotten to yet. I still need to upload standalone videos for Extraction 2, and Jesus Revolution are some that I'll be uploading within this week or the next week or so. And sometime either this week or next week will be the newest What I've Watched live stream, which will cover some of the movies I've watched since then. So be on the lookout for that coming soon, along with discussing DreamWorks, which should be either next week might be a little busy. Maybe 2 weeks from now, I think we'll do the discussing DreamWorks on Flushed Away.
Yeah, Jacob's channel's linked in the description. Go give him a subscribe there. And as for this channel, oh, it's a lot of stuff coming. A Smallville episode, I believe it's episode 2, or no, wait. I'll be recording on Thursday. I get my days confused, but Small Talk episode 2 is now live on the channel. Check that out. Live in the Movies dropping every Wednesday. And then yeah, a lot of good stuff coming to the channel. So be on the lookout for all of that. Road to Saw 10 is ongoing. My review for Saw 2 will be live this Friday, so stay tuned for all of that. But for Jacob Martin, my name is Ryan Cam. We will see you in the next one. Y'all take care.